Darren Murph, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Anna.
All right, guys, we are going to talk about retrofitting our workforce into this new world of work, whatever it's going to look like. We don't fully know yet. But Darren, you have been asked as a friend of mine and as an expert in this area to come on and talk about having a remote first workforce, right? You were remote first before the pandemic. So I'm hoping that you can share a lot of knowledge with us because there are so many organizations that weren't that way and had to be really scrappy in their response to the pandemic. And now I feel like we need to move from scrappy to sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. We've got to move from surviving this to
Mm,
thriving in this. And there's a lot of things that have to happen. A lot of commitment that has to be there, a lot of buy-in that has to be there. But the roadmap is there, the blueprint is there, and I'm excited to see what happens when people embrace that.
yes. I mean, I always say like borrow from people. What can you borrow from the best, right? And we're talking to a company that has made mistakes and learned and adjusted. We are not learning from scratch here. We have people and blueprints that we can use. And I appreciate you sharing your wisdom here, Darren. So I want to start out because there's people who are listening here and maybe they're leaders, maybe they're founders, executives, but I think there's also probably people, the humans that are doing this work that may not be in charge of making the decisions, but I want to add value really quick and start with one tip. Let's do one tip for the leaders or the companies and one tip for the employees about things that they should be thinking about right now. So which one do you want to start with first?
Let's start with the employers.
Okay.
So the one tip here is embrace and commit to the change.
Mm,
We're a year into this. If you've been burying your head in the sand or pretending that this is all going to go back to normal, it's time to embrace the change and commit to the change. And
mm,
that commit part is big because for organizational change to really take hold and for you to really get tailwinds, people working with you to evolve the company forward, you need to commit to it long term. It can't be just some flippant thing that we're just trying to get by until we quote unquote return to the office. People aren't interested in that. They want
mm.
to see what you're going to do as a business to evolve, to become something better, to grow through this. That's where you will find the buy-in and the advocacy from the people that you
Mm.
need on your side to make this a successful transition.
Okay. And this will be the challenge for me. We're going to pause on that and we're going to expand on it, but let's move to the one tip for the employee, the one working in the system right now.
Yeah, boundaries.
Mm,
Never in my working career have I seen the burden of boundary setting shift so acutely to the individual.
mm,
When you are used to having a commute, when you're used to traveling 8 to 10 times a year, life gave you some built in buffers, moments in time where you could not possibly book a meeting. All of that is gone. Life has no buffers left. Every available minute is available for the taking. So it's on each individual to say, no, I'm actually going to replace what used to be my commute time with meditation time or reading or cooking or cleaning, calling my mom, whatever that is for you for self-care. That's not selfish. That's smart. And
mm.
that's the only way you're going to prevent long-term burnout. So pause, set boundaries, and be the change you want to see. A lot of people are afraid that if they set boundaries, it'll be perceived as selfish in the organization. But what I've found is that most people are looking for role models in this way. And I think a lot of people would follow suit quickly.
Mm. Let's spend a little bit time here in the employee realm before we move back to the organizations, because I do feel like the honestly, the majority of the work is on the system. It's on the employer right now. But let's stay with the employee. We're saying, have those boundaries, set up, your own processes for rejuvenation, or maybe even filling your cup before you work, right? And that's on them. But what do they do? What do they say if they're in an organization that isn't as progressive, that maybe lifted and shifted their 9 hours of in-person meetings to now 9 hours of Zoom meetings?
Yeah. So the ultimate struggle for the direct report is they're stuck in this situation where they need the organization to take them part of the way so they can go the rest of the way. So if you're in this spot where you really want to set boundaries, but no matter how hard you try, you're stuck in back-to-back Zoom meetings because your organization isn't evolving to more asynchronous workflows, I see this as an opportunity. Be the pioneer within your own organization. I'm talking to dozens, hundreds of organizations and academics who are looking at this burgeoning trend of heads of remote. So GitLab has a head of remote. A lot of other companies have hired a head of remote or director of remote work. You can pioneer that in your company if they have not been progressive enough to think about this by saying, here's what we need to do. I've audited our tools, our workflows, our culture, and I'm pressure testing it. And here's what doesn't work when people are out of the office for an extended period of time. So here are some recommendations on tools and proven practices, small steps, iterative steps that we can start taking to evolve who we are as an organization. What I've found is that it doesn't take a lot of change to get a lot of relief. So even if you're able to, let's say, reduce the recurring meetings on your immediate team by 20% month over month, that's a lot of hours back in your life and everyone else's life, and the general quality of life as that rises. People become easier to work with. They think more clearly. Small steps can lead to big results. And so this is the opportunity. Even if executives won't admit it, they're eager to hear suggestions on getting through this and evolving. So you could be that change. It's a great opportunity to build something, and you've got the ears and attention of execs.
Yeah, I love that advice, Darren. And in an age where people are exploring side hustles, maybe even being an entrepreneur more, I am very encouraged by the people who are in organizations who are practicing being impactful entrepreneurs, right? Who are saying, I'm going to stay here and I'm committed. And therefore then those impactful entrepreneurs need to step up and take the reins, right? Because they're waiting. I think people are waiting to be given the reins. There is too much to think about, guys. These organizations are not just going to say, like, on a silver platter, here's everything I need you to do to be impactful. You're going to have to use your creativity and ingenuity. And I love what you're saying. Find that data, build the business case.
Yeah, it's a golden opportunity
Yeah.
to become an operational leader, a change agent, a
Yes.
positive force in your organization. This is your opportunity to step way outside of your day job and have a much bigger impact at an organizational level. And another opportunity here is that it's okay to fail. Like, this is an
Yes.
amazing opportunity to try things and learn from them. All of the world essentially is walking through the same thing together. It's a very unique time in the world where, to some degree, we all know what each other is going through. So there's some built-in empathy and understanding of where we're trying things out and we're seeing what
Mm.
works.
Yeah. And people ask me, how was I successful for 19 years inside companies as an entrepreneur? It's because I didn't stay in my lane. It's because, no, look, I did my day job. So I conquered that lane, and then I gave myself full permission to start looking elsewhere and sharing ideas. I always say I got it because I was curious and nosy, but we need to look out and take those blinders off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you won't be short on feedback. Just
Mm-mm.
open one ear. I guarantee you, people around your organization are voicing their challenges. Start tackling them one by one, or just offering some sort of feedback and solutions. Even for organizations that aren't really set up for this, now is the time to break down some of those preconceived notions. To make the remote transformation successful, you're going to have to unlearn a lot. So you might as well start with getting out of people's lanes and finding operational guidance where you would least expect it.
Awesome. Well, let's move to that area for the companies, for the leaders, for those decision makers in charge. I like to look at things when I move into organizations from a structure, process, people, tools, right? And I think sometimes that gets flipped. Oh, we want a tool that's going to help us be successful. We want the whatever the thing is, but we have got to look at foundation. So can we move through that pyramid together? Let's look first at structure, right? So the way that the organization is working and things are getting done, what are some things that we need to be thinking about in that area?
Structure is key. And globally, we're having the wrong conversation right now.
Okay.
People are asking, what happens when we return to the office? What do we need to properly go back to the office? That's a distraction. Where people work is largely irrelevant. Structurally, you need to focus on how people work. Look at your structure for how work gets done and audit it, pressure test it. What works in the office? What works on an airplane seat flying halfway across the Pacific? What works in someone's spare bedroom? Where are the gaps? If you fundamentally restructure the business so that your work happens no matter where someone is, it becomes largely irrelevant where they go. So maybe somewhere down the road, the office reopens or a few of your offices reopen. Maybe some people choose to work there because it's more productive than their spare bedroom, but it shouldn't change how they work. Now is the opportunity to audit those processes and get the how in line, no matter where someone is.
I love that because I think again it's less about where you are and more about what you do, which that's a big shift, Darren. Let's be honest. And I know that people listening to this are like, all right, yeah, Darren can say this at GitLab, but I worked in a lot of organizations that yes, we started out as, more traditional thinking, but when people step up and say things and come up with ideas and try new things and say like, what if we just tried this once, right? Then we can start moving into that. So it's a trial and error, right? Or a trial and fail or trial and learn, right? This isn't about what we can get wrong, it's what we can get right.
Totally. And I'll make a tech analogy here. We've moved a lot of processes into the cloud. And a lot of
Mm,
people said if we ever moved off premise and we put this valuable data up in the ether on the cloud, like what's going to happen? We now have to move our people and processes into the proverbial cloud.
yeah.
And if we look at where technology has taken us, we've only improved since then. And so it's time to evolve our people processes. But the structure is really key. If you continue to operate co-located first, office first, if your meetings are defaulting to office first, then they fundamentally don't work outside of the office. But if you convert all of your processes to a remote first so that everything works, if everyone is outside of the office, then they also work if everyone is in the office. But the
Mhm.
same is not true in reverse. And that's why the structure piece of this is so critical.
Right. And structure might be intimidating to some, right? They're saying like, "Oh, we're going to restructure everything. We don't even know where we're going yet." So let's say, "Okay, fine. We can maybe come back to that. Let's focus on those processes." Looking back at the journey that GitLab has taken and maybe even the other organizations that you talk to and work with, Darren, what's a process that occurs in a lot of companies that maybe we should think about or look at?
I think a good one to start at is meetings. And it's because so many processes, workflows, and cultural expectations are connected to that. And everyone across the organization, from intern to CEO, has some experience with meetings. So it's a nice central meeting point where we can all agree that we could probably improve our meeting hygiene. So if you look at what tools and processes should be in place to reduce the amount of meetings or make them more efficient, or make sure that we have checks and balances so that meetings only happen when they are truly more efficient than writing things down or working asynchronously,
Mm,
you end up solving a lot of other process problems. Meetings seem to collect all of the best and the worst of companies. And so I would start there.
okay. Agreed. Agreed. We spend far too much time in meetings when things could be done, new word in my vocabulary this year, asynchronously, right? I remember when my kids' remote teachers said that word, I was like, what are they talking about? But now it's something that rolls off my tongue much more freely.
Yeah, asynchronous is truly the superpower of remote teams.
Mm,
And I don't think any remote team can function well long term without really embracing it. And in the phases of the adaptation of remote, you mentioned a shift and lift earlier. That's phase one. I call this
mm,
skeuomorphism, where you're copying the office environment and pasting it into the virtual environment. The telltale sign that a company is evolving beyond that is that they are deliberate about asynchronous workflows. They have installed tools, processes, and a cultural understanding to move consensus gathering forward by
mm.
writing things down, by connecting ideas and giving people space and medium to brainstorm without having to have people online at the same time. That is essential for mental health. It's essential for transparency. It's essential for gathering the most amount of feedback and the richest amount of feedback. And increasingly, it's going to be a talent acquisition and retention tool.
Mm,
Increasingly, the top talent will look at an organization, and if they are not fundamentally sound in async, it's going to be a red flag. It would be like walking into a very prestigious organization and interview, and they said, "Oh, 401k matching, we haven't even considered that." It's like, really? Direct deposit, we haven't even considered that.
right.
Async is going to be one of those things where
Mm.
interviewees are going to ask, how flexible can my day be? How strong are your async practices? We have a short runway where companies are going to be able to say, oh, we're still figuring that out before it becomes a red flag for top talent.
Yes. And this is where my being raised by hippies comes out, but I'm like, power to the people. Like, it is about time that the power shifted back into the people's hands. And it's not going to happen overnight, right? This is going to take some accountability. Just like there are organizations out there that are financially successful without a healthy culture, that can exist, but I don't think that will be sustainable for the long run. So I love your prediction there, Darren.
Yeah, a key term coming out of COVID is democratization.
Mm,
This whole thing has massively democratized a lot of work.
yeah.
It has empowered people to show up in a job interview and ask outright, what is your stance on workplace flexibility? Pre-COVID, you had to have an incredibly high degree of self-awareness and self-confidence in yourself and your past portfolio of work to be so audacious as to ask something like that. But now you would almost be foolish to not ask it. It has to be something that
Yes.
is considered. And for sure, the people have more power now and they have more choice. And especially in the remote landscape, there's more remote possible jobs now than there maybe ever has been in the history of the world. That is huge for inclusivity. I'm excited to see what the second and third order effects of that are.
Me too. As tragic as this has all been, it has been a big reset for humanity in the workplace, which I'm appreciating. All right. So we've talked about two. We talked about structure, process. Let's move to the people, the actual humanity side of this, which speaks to my heart. What do we need to be thinking about to really engage the whole human?
We have to not just allow remote, but empower and enable it.
Mm,
If you tell someone, we're going to get most of the people back in the office, but we'll allow you to be remote if you want to. It's a very backhanded way to evolve the culture and be respectful of the flexibility that people may need or desire. There's a big difference between allowing and supporting. And supporting bleeds into asking the questions of what do people need in these individual spaces they have all around the world? Do we need to look at perks and policies and add new things or take away some things that people aren't utilizing now? Like, are people really coming to the foosball table anymore? I don't know. Maybe we could get rid of those and replace them with something else that matters, like childcare, for example.
mm.
So it's a fundamental audit of all the processes and policies, every part of the company that touched a person. You're going to have to look at and think about, does this still work when we have people vastly distributed?
Yes, I love this. Does it still work? And reflecting, right? It's the audit, adjusting, and trying and being honest with your people. Like, I think organizations might be afraid, oh, well, if we try it and it doesn't work, be open about that. We don't know what this is going to look like. We're figuring this out together. And I actually think that'll bring your people and their performance up a level.
Giving voice to the fact that we don't have this figured out is
Mhm.
step number one. You want to invite people to give you feedback to help build this bridge to whatever the future holds. Of course, no one has this totally figured out, especially if you're transitioning into this. You built an organization to function in one way, and now you fundamentally have to get it to function in another way. Ask people for their feedback instead of just making sweeping changes in hopes that it captures the
Yes.
new reality. Just ask people what they need, and then you save yourself all of that inefficient guessing. And people
Yes.
feel like they belong. One thing that I want to harp on here is belonging has as much to do with access to information as anything else that you could put in place from a diversity and inclusion
Mm.
standpoint. The more information you give people, the more transparent you are, the more vulnerable you are, the more opportunities you give individuals across the organization to provide their feedback and input and shape what the future looks like. That is belonging.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't necessarily correlate transparency to belonging, but coming from GitLab, where transparency is a value, I can say for sure that there's a very strong correlation between those two.
Yeah, I felt it myself inside organizations and I've seen it happen. So I agree with you, Darren. I think access to information is huge. So, last section, right? Let's talk about tools. You at GitLab have a tool that I'm obsessed with. You have been open and so, I guess, generous with what you have worked on internally. So, talk to us about your handbook. I know that's one of your favorite
Yeah, the
tools.
GitLab handbook is legendary. We're at about 8,000 pages and growing.
Goodness.
We open source all of our knowledge, all of our workflows, all of our processes. It's all available on the World Wide Web. If you search for GitLab Remote, you'll be sucked into the all remote section of the GitLab handbook. We
Yeah.
have over 50 guides on how we do everything from async to meetings to transparency. So the handbook is a huge resource. And when I mentioned earlier, the blueprint has been written, we literally published the remote playbook. And so it's a guide to transitioning and getting through this and evolving a company. But also we use GitLab, the product, for all of our project management. And that helps us have a single source of truth where work happens. And it's a very transparent tool. You need that in your organization, whether that's GitLab or some other tool. It needs to be a single place where work happens. And I would also say, look at existing tools that you're using and just think about how to use them differently. An example here is Slack. GitLab uses Slack. A lot of other companies use Teams, but you have some sort of chat program. But GitLab strategically removes all of our messages after 90 days. Well, why do we do this? Because we want to force work to happen in GitLab, the product, so that there's less anxiety with the red bubbles in Slack. Because you don't really want to do work in a tool that deletes all your work after 90 days. So we use it as a forcing function to use it as an informal communications tool. We have a parenting channel where parents can chat about how they're handling virtual schooling, for example. That's a much healthier way to use an existing tool. And frankly, a more transparent way when you force work into a tool like GitLab.
I appreciate that use of reusing of existing tools, that this doesn't have to be something where we have to go out and buy 15 new things. Please don't. From a change management perspective, your people cannot take that right now,
Yeah,
right?
you don't want to introduce more chaos right now. It's mostly about being smart with the tools you already have. Google Docs is another great example. We use live doc meetings. Every work related meeting has a Google Doc attached to it. So there's inherent transparency. So we're not reinventing the wheel with some magical meeting tool. We're just using Google Docs in an innovative way.
And I have obsessively read almost everything you guys have put out on remote work and work right now, Darren. So I feel like I saw in there a specific direction, or at least how you recommend or use it in GitLab, this handbook in terms of onboarding. I felt like that was so cool. Can you give us a little glimpse of that?
Yeah, our onboarding takes place in the handbook, so you can't avoid it. And that's very
Mm.
strategic. We want to make sure that the first things people read and engage with are in the same place that they'll need to refer to throughout their tenure at GitLab.
Yes. So start using this tool from the very beginning. And it's crowdsourced, right? So for organizations who have a handbook that's 2 pages long, and may want to push into this as a tool for the new work that they're doing, get your people, use their ideas and put them to work in this really engaging document. This is
Absolutely.
great, Darren. I love this. We could go on forever. I so appreciate you sharing your time and your generosity with us and all you do for culture and people in the workplace.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. Be well. Godspeed.
Sending you peace and progress.